Welcome to the Feisty Women's Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Gross, Ironman champion, PhD in women's history, and founder and CEO of Feisty Media. I started this show because I wanted to cut through the BS of diet culture and fitness culture and actually learn from high-achieving women at the top of their game who have figured out how to feel and perform their best at every stage of life. So I chat with experts, elite athletes, and leaders who have learned to succeed despite the massive gender data gap in exercise and medical science and product development. Every episode is filled with information, advice, and anecdotes that will help you fulfill your potential as an athlete, mom, leader, or business owner. And listen up. If you don't subscribe to our Women's Performance newsletter, you are definitely missing out. It's totally free. So head over to womensperformance.com and subscribe now. That's womensperformance.com. This podcast is a production of Feisty Media. Hello, Feisty people. I have been waiting for this episode for a while, and it is finally here. Today I'm talking to Lindsay Housman and Dr. Chris Napier from Hettas, a company that makes high-performance footwear designed specifically for women. I love this conversation because it includes everything I personally feel passionate about: women-specific research, entrepreneurship, and running. Lindsay is the founder and CEO of the burgeoning company, and she is positioned perfectly for success. And when I say success, I mean changing the running industry forever. As you will hear, Lindsay was an entrepreneur looking for a project when she found out that running shoe research is done entirely on men. Yes, that's right. All the research that goes into the design of the shoes that you wear every day to run has been based on male physiology and then shrunk to fit women's feet. Honestly, at this point, I'm not even really surprised. When Lindsay heard this, she knew what she had to do. And so, Hettas was born. The first thing the young company did when they were getting started was research on women and our specific running shoe needs. That's where Dr. Chris Napier came in. Chris is a clinical assistant professor at the Department of Physical Therapy at the University of British Columbia. He is also a member of the Minerva research group at Simon Fraser University. His research interests include running biomechanics and injury prevention, particularly through the use of wearable technology. Lindsay and Chris unpack the process from idea to full-fledged running shoe. We talk about how they figured out what women actually need and then designed 3 different shoes. I have been running in Hettas for weeks, and I am definitely a convert. The shoe feels light and easy and fits my foot perfectly. It's kind of like I didn't know what was broken until it was fixed. The shoe really does feel like it's made for me 1,000 times more than any other shoe on the market. And I've done a lot of running in my life. Hettas has also come on board with Feisty as our newest partner. So if you want to try the shoes and feel the difference for yourself, you can get 20% off with the code Feisty20 at hettas.com. And I will put that link in the show notes for you, as well as the code. Shipping is free, and so are refunds. So there is no risk in trying. Enjoy the episode. Lindsay, Chris, welcome to the Women's Performance Podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I am so excited to dive into this entire question around exercise science, women's physiology, running, and how we make products designed for women. But Lindsay, first, tell us a bit about your background.
I like to think of myself as a bit of an accidental entrepreneur. My background is in finance and technology, but I've always been really passionate about building strong teams, and I've always been really passionate about sports. And Hettas came up from an idea I had when searching for shoes for my own sport purposes, and I was having feet issues, and I have young daughters who are growing up in this world of sport and learning about how they're being treated as they get older in sport. And it seemed like a cause that I felt like we could make a difference in, and that I had the skill set from my previous more technical training to operate a business that could be successful in this area.
Cool. And Chris, I want to know about your background first, but I'm curious there, Lindsay, like, did you realize when you started having feet issues, like, when did you realize, or did you along the way realize it was something specific to the fact that the shoe wasn't designed for you?
I didn't know. And it probably wasn't until I was super frustrated. At the time, I was doing HIIT classes and I needed lateral support in my shoe. And I just would come home in pain. And then I'd try to go and find shoes, and it would be really difficult. And at the peak of my frustration, my husband, we know someone who's now our shoe partner who's been in the athletic shoe industry for over 40 years. And he was like, oh, we'll just have Doug make you a pair of shoes. And I was like, well, why would he do that? What would be different? And then I had a conversation with Doug that blew my mind. And here we are today.
Right. And the conversation was basically like, the shoes aren't designed for you.
Exactly. He was like, well, the shoes don't work for you because shoes are designed with the male anatomy in mind. And he had explained how he had been trained originally for a leather shoe company, where they do emphasize the difference between men and women's anatomy, maybe not biomechanics, but definitely down to an anatomy perspective. And then he moved from this casual or formal shoe into an athletic shoe and was basically handed one last that is the shape of a foot that they use to make the shoes that they wrap the upper around. And he was like, well, where's the women's last? And they're like, no, no, we have one last. And that to me was very shocking. And the industry is starting to move, but at the time that we started out on this journey, there wasn't an acknowledgement that there were differences very, very publicly around men and women's anatomy that would drive a different thought process in shoe design.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, Chris, tell us a bit about your background.
Okay. Well, I'm trained as a physiotherapist, a sport physiotherapist, and have worked clinically for over 20 years, and primarily with running, at least for the last 10 to 15 years. So I've kind of worked at all levels, from recreational right up to the national team with that position. And then I went back and did my PhD a little over 10 years ago now, and with a focus on running biomechanics. So looking at the way people run. At that time, I was interested in gait retraining. So can we optimize people's gait to avoid injury? And so that was my PhD, and then went on to do a postdoc fellowship in wearable technology, looking at ways to integrate wearable sensors to be able to monitor running outside of the lab. And now I'm an assistant professor at Simon Fraser University, and that's what I do. I study running injuries, running performance, primarily through a biomechanical lens, but looking at how we monitor training load and using a lot of wearable technology for that. And then I have this sort of little subspecialty in footwear, where I've sort of been working in that area for a few years now as well. Again, sort of looking at ways that footwear might prevent injury and ways it might improve performance. And I guess all through that journey, somewhat unintentionally at first, but now more intentionally, I've been working with women as sort of my like the participant group that I've been most engaged with. Most of my studies have had women participants right from the start. And so, yeah, so all of this is sort of, I guess, snowballed into where I'm at right now.
Cool. And I definitely want to ask more about, how we work with women in research and where the gaps are. Very interested in that. But Lindsay, how did you and Chris come to work together?
The beginning of Hettas was a lot of serendipity, and it was through a mutual friend that is, sorry, their friend that is really close with us, his good friend was the head or is the head of a new lab at Simon Fraser. So we met with him when we were searching out this topic and this project. Before we decided to fully go ahead and do Hettas, we wanted validation from a few different standpoints. And one of them was from a scientific lens of someone who is engaged in that community. And he had previously served on a larger brand science council. So we met with him and he was very validating around what we were wanting to do and why we wanted to do it. And also had a suggestion to meet with Chris. The fellow we were speaking to, his specialty is in exoskeletons. And he felt like there would be a lot of synergies with meeting with Chris. And so that's how we ended up meeting. But what I find so interesting through this pattern too, though, is everybody has daughters. And that was a thread that was pulled at the beginning of this between our product partner, Chris, the fellow who introduced me to Chris at the beginning, and even now, the men that seem to be drawn to what we're doing all have daughters, which has been really fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. And Chris, like, how would you explain how big the data gap is in like sort of exercise science and kinesiology? Like, where are the places, or I mean, this is a massive question I'm asking, but like, where are some of the places where like Lindsay said earlier, like they handed over like 1 foot, like where are the places
Mhm.
where the 1 foot where the shoe fits the 1 foot, and then how do we know where we need to be specifically studying women and their needs?
Well, I think I could probably answer that question almost in reverse in saying that like there's probably only one area, maybe two, where there's kind of more focus on women than men in sports science, and that would be in relative energy deficiency in sport, and also possibly in the study of bone stress injuries, which are related. And otherwise, there's just a massive gap with everything else, and it's from recreational up to kind of elite levels. More prevalent in elite levels of sport for sure. So around performance, there's hardly any research that looks at either differences between men and women or looks at women in isolation.
Right.
And but also down at the recreational levels, and it comes down to the fact that I think most researchers have either made the assumption that their findings can just be applied from men to women. They just look at women as being smaller men, or they just sort of disregard because it's too difficult, right? There's just too many other uncontrollable variables with women that might sort of mess with the control in their studies.
Right. Mess with the control.
Women
Right.
women are confounding subjects, I think,
Right.
was one of the quotes out of a 2016 research paper, which was another sort of blow my mind type of moment. And I guess I could see that someone going into a study being like, I want this to be the cleanest set of data possible. If I have to introduce hormonal elements, monthly cycles, and then beyond that, what even stage of hormonal life journey is this person at? Because it's not the same for a 20-year-old to a 38-year-old to a 48-year-old woman. I could see logically how you would cut that out, but it's part of what makes us really different and needs to be studied.
Yeah, when I was an elite athlete in university, I volunteered for a study where they put out, like, it was for elite athletes, and they put out a running time for 10K that you had to be able to do to qualify for the study. And it was like pretty swift time, right? And I actually don't think they expected any women to apply. And then when I did, they were like, "Oh, no, sorry." Like, you're not included. Like, it was so weird. That was I'm actually surprised I didn't react more strongly to that moment, but that was like my moment of like, oh, what? First of all, you made assumptions that like no women were going to apply who could run that fast. And then secondly, like once I was there, they were like, wait, no, you're a confounding variable.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So Chris, if we're looking at like running specifically, like what are some of the unique needs that women have physiologically?
Well, so I guess we've sort of looked at it in like three broad buckets. One being differences in anatomy, and those are the most obvious. And it's not just the foot. So we're talking about footwear, but there are differences in foot anatomy between males and females. But there's also other differences in anatomy that affect how someone runs. So differences in leg length and uh, width of the pelvis and the hips can affect the angles that you strike the ground at. But so that's sort of anatomical. Physiological are probably a little bit more, around menstrual cycle and all the differences that can, all the different variations of the menstrual cycle that can occur in women and throughout the lifespan as well. Uh, and then, on the biomechanical side, that's kind of my area of research. And I was actually just shocked when I started looking into it that there's not enough research to really even guide us at this point. And where there is research that's looked at, men and women in the same study, there haven't really been comparisons made. We haven't really sort of looked at the differences enough to really understand where there's differences and where there's similarities in running biomechanics. So that's definitely an area we're looking at, as well as trying to combine some of these categories. So looking at changes in running biomechanics at different phases of the menstrual cycle or after menopause. And that sort of thing, because we're really interested to see how things may change either through the monthly cycle or through someone's lifespan.
Right. If I'll ask you both this question, but like Chris, what would be like your wish list for the top 3 studies that you would like love to be able to do?
Oh, good grief. I don't know. I mean, to be honest, what I think has turned a lot of researchers off studying women, the fact that it's difficult, I see as like an opportunity, in that there are so many different studies that we could do to get a better picture of what's going on. So I mean, I'm interested in injury prevention. So I think, I'd like to look at if injury risk is increased at certain life stages or menstrual phases. If it is, are there things that we might be able to do to lower that risk? That's kind of one area I'm really interested in. I'm also interested in the performance side of that. But to me, I love running, and I have 2 daughters that run, and I have a mother who's 80, turning 82 next in 2 weeks, and still runs as well. And so for me, I really want to keep people running their whole lives. And so I think anything we can do to make that possible, that's of interest to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Lindsay, what about you? What would be the areas you would study if you could make a wish list?
The first two would be hormone related. One is around the monthly cycle and better understanding that, exactly to what Chris is saying around training plans, injury prevention, alterations, and how different parts of the cycle may impact, in particular for ligaments and tendons and just elasticity from estrogen changes. I'm really fascinated with. I want to really study more about perimenopause and menopause, and someone who's gone through all of the hormonal life changes. It's like, I'm really curious about what that means to what I can't see or I can't feel that's going on, again, in my joints, in my ligaments and tendons, and what could I do to keep myself active for the rest of my life. And then for those people going through the beginnings of should they choose to have a family, pregnancy, and postpartum, and the whole range of body changes that happens, and then the recovery of postpartum, and understanding what could we do to provide footwear based on what we can learn about the, I don't know if it's physiological or anatomical changes that occur during those periods. My third one is really around metatarsals. I am, and selfishly, I have a few different metatarsal issues, and they've definitely changed as I've aged. Some have been with me longer, some are newer, and I'm really curious because from the run study, we did a run study separate from SFU as part of the Hettas shoe development. And it was a common theme in women over the age of 40, primarily 50s and 60s, where in our surveys we were getting back, there was lots of commentary around either metatarsal issues that they had that we needed to take into account, or relief from pain. And I didn't realize that there was that large of a change potentially, and I'm just saying this anecdotally, in metatarsals and what women experience. And if I think about being active until I'm hopefully 82 or older, like the one thing that's going to prevent me from doing that is metatarsal issues. And I after looking through the run study data, I didn't feel like I was alone in that. And so it's an area I'm pretty passionate about.
Yeah, as soon as you said metatarsal, I was immediately like sat up because I'm like, yes, like it's all the, like, how many people do I know who have had fractures, or I don't know even what you call it, like those hot spots,
Neuromas?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so many women that I know have had those issues. Yeah. Lindsay, did you always set out to make a shoe? Like when you first envisioned becoming an entrepreneur and helping active women, like were you straight away like, it's got to be a shoe, or where did you start?
No, not at all. I, my husband and I talked a lot about this, and he is in the background in this project as an advisor, and and definitely, even though I'm leading it, still very much, part of it. And we just really felt passionate about women in sport and all of the benefits that sport gives to you, things that you don't learn in the classroom. Particularly, there's a lot of confidence building, teamwork, leadership skills that innately come from being part of a team, from competition, from learning how to lose, from the discipline of training. And we have two young, really active daughters who also do track, amongst other things. And it was really about how do we create something that will serve them in their futures and their lives, and serve women, and help with sort of the gender inequality that still exists. And a lot of, it's always talked about as the pay gap, but I really think there's a confidence gap also there, and that sport plays a really big role in that. So we were looking at something for women in athletics. We talked a lot about different athleisure ventures. We talked a lot about doing something more targeted at sort of teens and tweens. If you would have asked me 10 years ago, was it going to be footwear? The answer was no. But when we had this conversation with Doug and I learned more about it, it just felt right. Like it was just like, this is the area that we can make a difference in. And it's an area that it's not going to be easy, but challenging the status quo hasn't really happened. And I love to challenge the status quo. And so that, I was kind of up for that challenge, and that's how we landed on footwear.
What were some of the other ideas? Like you said, athleisure and maybe tweens, like were like programs, or was it all product based as you explored?
It was mostly product based, but then partnering with programs. So even as we're going through Hettas, my husband and I love technical gear. So it was always going to be gear of some sort of product. But then what was the give back going to be was the other element. And that's something we're still figuring out with Hettas, what those programs are that we are going to partner with to have a give back, that sort of collegiate age through to elementary, whereas the product's focused on the adults. And so it was always product. The challenge with doing younger products for younger kids is margins and having a profitable, sustainable enterprise. And so we wanted to create a company that would be able to make a difference, that would be able to be profitable, to fund the initiatives like the research and impact programming. And so we've decided to focus on an adult product with give back to a younger generation.
As a lifelong runner and triathlete turned CrossFitter, I am stoked to announce that the athletic eyewear brand Tifosi Optics has joined us as a partner here at Feisty Media. Tifosi sports glasses hit all the marks for athletes. They're shatterproof polybicarbonate, so the lenses not only reduce glare, but also offer scratch resistance, which I 100% need. They stay in place when you are moving. The hydrophilic rubber nose pads actually get more grippy the more you sweat, so they are secure and don't slide down your face even when you're running in hot conditions. No matter what sport you do, Tifosi has shades for you. Whether you love tennis, fishing, pickleball, running, cycling, or just hanging out on the beach. They are super reasonably priced, which I love, so I can have multiple pairs that go with any outfit. And of course, Feisty listeners get a special discount. So head on over to tifosioptics.com and use the code FM20. FM as in Feisty Media to get 20% off your order. That's FM20 at tifosioptics.com. I'll put a link in the show notes to make it easy for you. Okay, I want to talk about the process of like the research, how we get from like the initial research to making a shoe, right? So I know that like Chris, you came in at some point along the way, but like Lindsay, where did you start? Where did you say, okay, when you starting that process of like, okay, what do I need to know to make a women's specific shoe? What questions do you ask? Who did you go to? That kind of stuff.
A lot of the shoe development, well, most all of the shoe development was done by Doug, our shoe partner. So we brought Doug on in 2021, and he started playing around with fit. And fit samples based on his knowledge of the industry and of women in general through his years of development. I think Chris, you started doing the first research project in January 2022. And
all right, yeah.
And there were two research projects that ran January to June. So we were building prototypes while Chris was working on the research. Mm-hmm. And then as we were learning some nuggets from the research, making tweaks to the prototypes. So they were going along concurrently just because of the nature of the length of time to develop a shoe and the length of time to conduct a proper research study. And then as our protos got to be further along, we would send them to Chris's lab, and we were trying to replicate Nike Alpha Fly study with the Instron machine as far as measuring run economy on the shoes and testing the foams and plates and different variations. So there were, at that point, 3 different things happening concurrently, where we're getting more information from the research studies because now they were in draft. We had testing going on in Chris's lab, where I'll let him talk about it, but they had to construct a female force profile for us to do the testing. And then we had people actively wearing the shoes. And sort of the result of those 3 things led to a proto that we introduced to a run study in end of November 22.
Right. That is interesting. Okay, so Chris, what does that look like? Like, how did you which nuggets of information came out of your study that went into the shoe design?
Well, so we started off with just an overall, lit review on, what were the differences in, again, those sort of three buckets of anatomy, physiology, and biomechanics. What's out there, what's been published. So that was really sort of like a broad overview just to get us started. And I think that's where we realized, okay, we've got a lot of work to do here. That, normally you can sort of see what's been done and then build on it. And this was a case of in a lot of the areas that we want to do research, it was like, okay, we actually have to start from the bottom here. And so that was a bit eye-opening. And then we also did a focus group study with, we had two groups of women, who had a competitive running group and a more recreational running group that spanned all ages and different sort of competitive backgrounds, experiences, where we sort of explored co-designing a female-specific running shoe with them. And we looked at sort of things that they've always sort of, had issues with fit, or how it feels when they're running and things like that, and how that may have changed over their lifespan. And we got some really, really interesting information out of that study. And I think what was surprising, I think, to a lot of participants in that study was the commonality of their experience. And like the more we've talked to people, we realize this, but it's this sort of realization that, oh, I thought that was just me. And when it's actually, most women have had issues with certain fit issues that they've had to kind of develop their own workarounds for, to try and make sure their heel doesn't slip out of the back of the shoe and that sort of thing. So that was a really interesting and informative study. And then, Lindsay mentioned we kind of moved into this study where we looked at the different compositions of foam and plate in their prototype, and we looked at it in two different ways. We looked at it in a sort of lab environment where we looked at how much energy return was delivered by the foam. So basically using a machine to compress the midsole and then let it rebound. And that's how they sort of looked at that in the Nike Vaporfly and other shoes, to sort of look at how much energy is returned per step. And it's believed that that's linked closely to improvements in running economy. So then we also looked at running economy in the Hettas shoe and other shoes, and map that out. So that's sort of where we're at. And then we've got sort of a full slate of studies coming up, looking at things like how the different foam compositions might affect the durability of a shoe, and how that relates to the running economy, how different foam and plate combinations might be optimized for women to improve performance. So yeah, lots to be done for sure. And as I said, also the study looking at different changes in biomechanics throughout the menstrual cycle.
But maybe just to tack on to Chris for a minute.
Yeah.
So with the research from the first from the lit review, there's not a lot out there, like Chris said, and a lot of what is out there is fit related. So we drew on a lot of the learnings related to the positioning of the woman's ankle bone, the shape of their foot and the impact of the fifth metatarsal, the curvature of the instep, as well as narrow, sort of like women's feet are more pie shaped. So a lot of the learnings that we were able to take out of the research were fit related to start. And then the learnings related to foam and plate, we didn't want to put a carbon plate in the shoe. We had a hypothesis that the stiffness of the carbon plate and the force that we hypothesized a woman would produce versus a man, that the full benefit of the plate wouldn't be engaged necessarily, and that it could potentially be harsher if you were using
Yeah.
it on a more regular basis. And so we
Yeah.
wanted to use either a nylon or a Pebax or some other plate material. So the first iterations of testing in the lab with Chris's team involved varying the densities of the foam, as well as varying what plate we were putting in the shoe. And also doing, and I'm going to get this name wrong, Chris, the rigidity test that we did, the torsional,
Yeah, the
not torsional.
longitudinal bending stiffness.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So we were doing the energy return and then this longitudinal bending to figure out what we thought, based on a women's force profile, would provide a comfortable but supportive and propulsion like feeling in their shoe.
Is it scary at all? Like I'm thinking like, okay, you've just described this situation where you went to try to find the research on women's various aspects of women's running. It's the research isn't there, but you're like, I'm gonna make a shoe. Right? Like is it a little bit scary to go, okay, like we'll build something based on what we know now, but it might have to evolve or change.
Yes, it's definitely scary. I think because I've worked in tech for the last 12 years, I'm used to living in a world of iterations
Mhm.
and a world of constant enhancements.
Mhm.
So for me, this shoe that we've put out there is a solid first attempt based on what we were able to know. And sort of the technologist in me is like, well, of course, we're going to learn more and adapt it, which I think has allowed me to be a little less scared. I think the opportunity of what there is to learn really excites me. I get nervous, almost the reverse. There are some people that are wearing the shoe that really love it. And so for those people that it's working for, how do we evolve the shoe without changing that for the core original fans, which I know happens in all the shoe companies out there. The V2 comes out, the V3 comes out, and at some point you're like, oh, the shoe this used to work for me doesn't work for me anymore. And so I think the part of the challenge we're going to have is we're going to keep learning, and you don't want your SKU count to get huge. So how do we apply those learnings and keep this core audience that we're building and these early adopters that have found something that really works? How do we keep them engaged and work to keep their experience whole as we evolve the shoe? That actually scares me more.
Right. And it could be like, it's like everything in women's health, where it's like the solution where there might be like one thing that works for most men.
Yes.
In women's health, it's like, oh, you might have a 12 iterations of the same thing because people have different hormone profiles or at different stages of life, like all of those things.
Well, and I think that goes to why we have three different midsole offerings, which are both use case, but also personal preference. And some of that goes as well to metatarsal support, which has been a bit of an ancillary learning on our side. But we also provide two insoles, and there's not a lot of work done on insoles. Doug is really passionate around insoles, and we have put two very high quality insoles in our shoes, which is not commonplace. It's a really easy way to cut it. And so I'm really curious as we evolve this is how can we leverage the sock liner or the insole, something that is removable and you can produce and change? And is there a way to use that as we learn to adapt the shoe? So without changing the midsole structure substantially.
Right. Yeah, I actually my one team member, Celine, who has her shoes and is very much enjoying them, said she really enjoyed having the options for the two different insoles.
It's really fascinating. We've been doing run clubs at Turf. This is our third one this week, and I've been there helping people try on shoes, and it's not a given which insole people are going to choose. I thought it would be more cut and dry, and it's really interesting hearing the feedback. It's very polarizing.
Right.
It's one or the other.
Yeah.
But it's not skewed one direction.
Interesting. Yeah, and something, Chris, I wanted to follow up on there. You mentioned that someone's running economy might change across the menstrual cycle. Is that right? Like,
It's conceivable.
yeah, what just that, like, how do we look at what questions do we even ask, or how do we study that? You know?
Well, so running economy is a product of a number of different things. I mean, it's we can talk about biomechanics as being part of it, and certainly like we've seen improvements in running economy directly from wearing different footwear, which improves biomechanics directly. But there's all kinds of other things that go into someone's running economy, and a lot of physiological differences, and obviously training, right? So it's a hard thing to study, I guess, in isolation. I guess we could look at how we could optimize the shoe for someone's biomechanics, or we could look at how we could optimize it for their physiology at that time of the month. And so for instance, if there's if we see that there's a longer ground contact time, or a shorter step length or something like that associated with a certain menstrual phase, and I'm just plucking these out of midair, we could potentially align the shoe that's going to work best for that. But I think more broadly, we could look at how we use different foam densities and different stiffness of the plate in the shoe to optimize them for women in general, but also potentially at different menstrual phases.
Right.
Can I ask a question to Chris?
Absolutely.
I'm really curious, we with tendons and with Achilles, with the Achilles and estrogen, and how that could impact, like you were saying, with that estrogen's role in either laxicity or not, would that play a role then in the gait cycle of where a woman was at in her menstrual cycle?
Potentially. I mean, I think the thing we have to be careful of is that there's definitely sex differences, but there's also a lot of differences within each sex, a lot of variability, and so we don't want to over extrapolate our findings either. I think, I guess at this point, all I can say is it's possible, right? And if we keep on going down this line of studies, I mean, that is something that would be interesting to look at. We know that the Achilles tendon is a huge part of, what affects someone's running economy, their ability for that tendon to be stiff but elastic and return energy with every step. And so if those tendon properties, that stiffness of the tendon, are changing through different periods of the month, then yes, conceivably that could have an effect on someone's running economy and consequently their performance.
It feels similar to anything in women's health is we know, for example, some of the hormone changes that might affect our training or make us feel different ways during training. And sometimes it's not we don't need to adjust everything or always have special equipment for if we're ovulating or if we're what phase we're in, but actually just knowing that something that could be slightly different than when we notice is there something we could do to make our training a little bit better or be a little bit better. So it's kind of like micro things. It's not always necessarily everything has to change or we need 30 shoes for 30 days of our cycle, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think even that knowledge gives you the ability to maybe plan around it or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm. Or maybe react to a twinge that you're feeling a bit differently because of where you're at, and alter the plan for the next few days.
For decades, running shoes have been researched, tested, and designed for men. Brands have relied on the shrink it and pink it approach to sell male shoes to female customers. That's why we are so excited to be working with Hettas. Hettas designs athletic footwear for women that elevates performance, safety, and style. Hettas unlocks the science behind women's biomechanics through dedicated research, creates better shoes for women that support their longevity and performance, and establishes new design standards to promote transparency in a male-biased industry. Hettas have a lower ankle collar to reduce rubbing, a breathable mesh toe box to allow for ventilation and to allow for female toe shape, a special kind of plate in the midsole to keep tired legs going, a narrow heel cup to reduce heel slippage and take the pressure off our Achilles, and a rounded instep to create a snug fit. Hettas has 3 shoe models designed for different sessions: the Alma Cruise for long runs, the Alma Tempo for training days, and the Alma Speed for pushing the pace. I've personally been running in the Alma Cruise and I love them. It's the shoe I always wanted and never knew I needed. The fit is perfect in every way. You can get your own pair of Hettas at hettas.com and use the code FEISTY20 for 20% off. That's FEISTY20 at hettas.com, and it will all be in the show notes. Building muscle can be tough, and gains can be so slow, even for those of us who do a lot of strength training. As an ex-endurance athlete who is now in perimenopause, I know this all too well. It can be frustrating to put in the time in the gym and not see the results I'm looking for. That's why it's super important to take the right supplements at the right time. One of those supplements is essential amino acids, which are needed to trigger muscle protein synthesis. Muscle protein synthesis happens when you eat high-quality protein, like eggs or whey. And by supplementing with additional essential amino acids, you can make sure you are getting the full benefit of your training sessions. Targeted essential amino acid formulas can be up to 4 times more effective than just eating protein. I've been taking amino acids for almost a year, and in combination with eating quality protein and a couple other supplements, I have managed to turn the tides on age-related muscle loss, which starts at 30 for women, by the way, and I have continued to make strength gains as I head towards 50. AminoCo has been a long-time sponsor of Feisty Media and has supported all of our brands and podcasts over the years. I recommend starting with AminoCo Perform, and you can grab some at aminoco.com/performance. If you enter the code PERFORMANCE, you will save 30% and receive a free gift if it is your first purchase. Give it a try and let me know how it goes. That's aminoco.com/performance and use the code PERFORMANCE to save 30%. Endurance sports should be accessible to everyone, right? That's why we are so excited to be partnering with Motive. Motive is one of the fastest growing training apps in the world today, with thousands of amateur athletes signing up every month and a nearly perfect 4.9 star rating in the App Store. You are not a template, and your training plan should not be either. Prepare for running races, triathlons, cycling events, duathlons, or swim runs, however your season schedule shapes up, and get training written by some of the best coaches in the world in each discipline who know what it takes to help amateur athletes reach their goal on race day. The app takes the training written by those experts and then creates the most optimal training plan for your schedule, abilities, and goals. Plus, the training is fully customized to your race schedule, how much you can train each week, your current abilities, and the goals you want to achieve in your race. You can use the app for free as long as you want, or get all the upgraded features from the app for just $19.99 a month. But as a Feisty listener, you can sign up at mymotive.com and use the code FEISTY for 2 months of full premium access. That's right, you get 2 months of premium for free. So you quite literally have nothing to lose. So head over to mymotive.com, MYMOTTIV.com, and use the code FEISTY, FEISTY. And on a personal note, I know the founder of Motive, and he is driven to make triathlon and all endurance sports more accessible for the athletes who care about their performance but who aren't quite ready for a full-time personal coach. If that sounds like you, definitely try the app for 2 months for free. You literally have nothing to lose. Okay, so Lindsay, if a friend of mine asks me about my new shoes and she says, like, what is special about that shoe? Why does it what makes it specific for you as a woman? What do I tell her?
Definitely the upper construction from the material choices, which are really light and breathable, in particular to the heel and ankle area, where we did a lot of work to make sure women's ankle bones are lower. We didn't want the collar to rub against your ankle bone. We didn't want to have a plastic heel counter. We wanted something that was not going to put pressure against the Achilles. So a lot of work to figure out how to keep your heel in while having a low ankle collar. Definitely is a big difference. The instep as well, the lacing structure. We've had a lot of really great feedback around the way we've designed that, and that people feel really held, that their foot is secure. A lot of people, not everybody, not needing to use the heel lock or the seventh eyelet, they traditionally have had to use that in other shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And then the toe box, we've added extra height. So women's toes tip up more than men's toes, and there's can be toe bang. So I think in the research there was a recommendation for extra millimeter to 2 millimeter in toe box height, and so we, after the run study where we got feedback we were still a bit too low, we added extra height there. We haven't had anyone pop their toe through, which is amazing. No one has broken through the upper. From the midsole, we wanted it to be cushioned, and I say that because it's not a Hoka, it is a plated shoe, but a plated shoe with cushioning. And because we were designing the shoes for women, we knew we could use polymers and densities of foam that you wouldn't typically use in a male shoe because they would pack out too soon. So it allowed us to play with the foams that were going in the shoe, in particular for the cruise. And then the top layer of the foam in the tempo is also quite cushioned, and that combined with the polymer type you typically wouldn't put in a male shoe. The speed, those foams are firmer, so probably a bit less of a difference there, but definitely in the bottom too.
Cool. I'm excited to try it. And if I ask both of you, is there anything that came out of the things that you've learned since you started studying women's running that you wish women knew?
I wish women, I think it goes back to like what you're saying about women's healthcare. I wish women knew how they were considered in shoe design or not considered in shoe design. And I think it would make me ask different questions, or it will make me ask different questions when I go to buy footwear. I just think of the type of impact you put on your footwear, on your body through your footwear. And I'd like to think that my physiology was considered and tested when shoes are being sold to me as women's shoes.
Mm-hmm. You're not just shrunk from the men's shoes.
Yeah.
You'd like to think.
I would say also like that just to let women know that they're not alone, because that was the big thing I think that came out of our focus group study, like that all these women saw that it was just them, their feet, that were the problem. And that's come up again in like my clinical practice, working with runners. I pay a little bit more attention to this now, and so I chat with my women patients and tell them like Yeah, there's a reason why that's not fitting your forefoot, and why you are using that heel lock on your shoe. They're not made for you. Um, and so I think that's probably an important understanding that's come out of all this.
Yeah, it's funny. I used to joke because like when I was an elite athlete, like that the guys knew what the men that we trained with knew what they knew because they had like sports science studies, and like we knew because of oral tradition. Like and in a way, like it's funny, but it was like true where we had literally like other elite athletes who were older. We'd like pass on this information specifically around like how our menstrual cycle was affecting our training is the big one I can think of. Like that, like I never read anything about that at all. We just knew stuff because someone else told us, and how to mitigate symptoms and stuff like that. Whereas that it made me think of that when you're talking about women feeling isolated, like because we had each other. And if I hadn't had those other women in my training group, I literally wouldn't have had information. Right. And so if you're just someone who started jogging on your own, and you're feeling something weird about your shoe, you don't know if it's just you or if it's everybody. So yeah, it's so interesting. hmm okay, Lindsay, what is like you mentioned that like Hettas is very community oriented. What does the sort of future look like for the company? I know you have three different types of shoes right now. What are you planning?
This year's really focused on establishing some core communities. So Vancouver is one of them, and we're exploring a couple other communities in Canada and in the US where we can go and create a foundation there and really become active with their run clubs and their run community. And we're extend the research that we're doing through seeding shoes and surveys. So a big part of what we've been doing in the communities, besides hosting run clubs, is picking out 3 to 5 run teams or clubs and seeding 10 shoes, and then building our data through anonymized responses that can contribute then to Chris's research. So we want to keep doing that, and we're looking at all of our shoes are plated right now, so developing styles that aren't plated, that are more sort of cushioned, and also examining some of the newer, older trends of going back to a bit of a low profile runner and seeing what that could look like. So lots from both a community, a product development, and a geographic focus for us in the next 18 months.
Yeah, it's exciting to be part of something where there's so much potential, like I feel like we have so far to go because as we talked about, like the research we're only just getting started. So I feel like there's a lot of potential for this.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
So if someone wants to try the shoes, like how do you like you sell them online, how could they try them? And then what would be like your return policy? Because I know that's a big thing, right? Like if someone
Yes.
orders something online, that would be for me, like I don't get the right size or whatever. I want to make sure it's easy to get it to get the right shoe. So how do they order online and how do you deal with that?
We have a really easy returns policy. It was one of the things we wanted to make sure we had set up. So if you have your order number and your email and you need to return or exchange your shoes, you can just go to the returns page, which is on the footer of the website. You can get to it really easily. Enter in your order number, enter in your email, you get a label, Canada Post or FedEx usually, and you just ship it back to us. We pay for the return. When you're going through that process, if you want to exchange and not return, we give you that option as well. So you can choose an exchange, send your shoe back. Once we receive your shoe, then we will send you the new shoe, and it's pretty seamless. So we definitely wanted to make sure that it was as easy as possible for online. And of course, we're open to feedback. If anyone's going through the returns process and has questions or has had issues, we have a customer care email, and you can reach out to us really easily.
Cool. Well, I'm excited to try mine, and I encourage everyone to like support this kind of venture as well. Like try the shoes because I mean, ultimately they likely are going to be better for us as women. So thank you for everything that you're both doing. We really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having us, Sarah. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.